So when people used to ask me where I was from, when they heard my accent, I would say I was from Syria. And they would go, what? Where is that? No one knew where Syria was on the map. And I had to point it out for them. When I said I was from Syria then, I would hear the vendors on the street. I would see the cobblestones. I would smell the jasmine. I would touch the Mediterranean water and see the kids jumping into the waves. Now everyone knows where Syria is on the map. Unfortunately, it's not for a good reason. So now I say I'm from Syria, and I hear explosions. I smell fire. I see tears, and I see toddlers floating on the Mediterranean Sea. Syria is not the same anymore to me. There is this sadness, the anger, and the shame. So my first poem is, I Say My Country. I say my country, and the giddiness of the jasmine's white is in a red grief drowning. I say my country, and the warm memory of the place, whenever I recall it, vomits in my face. I say my country, and I search the fog for a placenta or an umbilical cord, but I stumble upon a guillotine or a gallows rope. I say my country, and I refuse to replace Bab el-Hara with the dismembered body parts. I refuse to replace discussing vote for Stars Academy with discussing conspiracy theories. I say my country, and my alliance sobs, lost in the fog of biddings and mobs. To whom I belong? To a cold shadow in the pastor's closes? To a hibernation hidden in the wood of a cross? To a turbulence living in the Quran pages? To a torrent of anger sweating the blood of resentful rage? To a holocaust that burns our religions and faith? To a scream of madness calling for Nero's flames? To whom I belong? To a death assuming the children forms? To a bomb fragments disintegrating in my womb and in the head of my killers? To a butcher that had become your neighbor and my neighbor? And who recognizes the identity of this hung meat? And who still has in their eyes one tear instead of a stone? I say my country, and I dismount the steed of my fairy tale. I fasten its straps to the gate of pain. I wait for the flood, and I pray that I see the light of dawn in my days. So my aunt lived on the first floor. She was single. She never had children. She lived on the first floor of our apartment building. We lived on the third, and she lived on the first. And she had a street-level garden that she took care of. She grew flowers, roses, jasmines. And her jasmine was so expensive, it actually flooded over the fence. And people would be strolling around down the street, and they would stop by her garden, and they would smell the jasmine. and pluck some flowers. And she actually didn't mind. She was so proud of her garden. So my aunt took care of us when we were little and when my parents weren't around, and we took care of her when she got old. She got to a point where she needed full-time care, so she moved to a nursing home in Damascus. So when the apartment we lived in was bombed in 2013, my house was destroyed and hers. And even if she wanted to go back home, if she was able to, she didn't have a place to go back. So during the war, people were hungry. Everything was expensive. They lost their jobs. There were no food, no gas, and hunger drove people to stealing. So when my aunt died in 2013, they called a distant cousin who was still living in Syria to come and take care of things. So my cousin arrived to see my aunt dead in the bed, clothes on and nothing else. She lost all her belonging. Her watch, she wore a gold necklace that I remember as long as she had it on, as long as I remember. And her wallet with her ID card, she was left with nothing. So this next poem is dedicated to my aunt. Her name is Rose. And I'm going to read this poem in Arabic first. I don't know if anyone speaks Arabic here or understands Arabic, but at least you get the sense of the music. And then I'm going to read it in English. عمتي روز قالت: في بلدي سرقت هويتي وانتشلت أيقونتي، أغمضت عيني على وجعي وحدتي فغدرت في غفوتي، أي سلام ينتظرني في تربتي، أي خزلة تسور مقبرتي. سألت حامل الرفشة أن يتلو أسماء إخوتي أولادهم وزوجاتهم على مسمعي، سألته أن يحفر عميقا لأدفن ذاكرتي. يا سمين حديقتي ينادي برائحة الصيف الذي اختيل، بنداء البائع الذي توارى، بشراب الورد الذي تبخر، بفنجان القهوة الذي تكسر، بما كان يوما ما كان ولن بعد اليوم يكون. I'm just gonna read part of it in Arabic, so I'm gonna read the whole translation in English now. So this is the translation in English. As I die, alone in a country at war. In my country, they stole my identity card and snipped my rosary. They robbed me as I closed my eyes to sleep through my loneliness. What peace is waiting for me in my grave? What disappointment is fencing my cemetery? I asked the grave digger to recite the names of my brothers, the names of their wives, and the names of their children. I asked him to dig deeper so I can bury my memories. The jasmine in my garden is calling me with the smell of summer that was assassinated, the merchant's calls that disappeared, the flower syrup that turned sour, the coffee cups that were shattered with what once upon a time was, but after today, will never be again. In my country, there will be no flowers to top my coffin. Only my shame will embellish my grave. Lonely, and I don't dare to think, and I don't dare to remember. Lonely, I don't dare to ask. Today, I vanish in the darkness, stripped even from my own identity. Who tomorrow will find my cross? Who will locate my rosary? They divided like thieves my remain. Children, I gave them Easter time olive branches to hold. Neighbors, I greeted them when they stopped by my garden to clip a flower or smell a rose. I asked the grave digger to recite the names of my brothers, the names of their wives, and the names of their children. I asked him that if one day someone find my identity card, to wipe off my grave the dust of shame. I call on you, my country, you who expelled my loved ones. Before you bury me, you ought to bury in the darkness my sorrows. You ought to make me forget my family faces. You ought to let this dust wash out my desolation. So my husband, best friend, Joseph Khouri, lived in Aleppo all his life. He was a, not mechanical, he was chemical engineer. He was a chemical engineer. His father was impressionist artist, actually pretty famous. They had a street named after him in Aleppo. Don't know if this street still exists. So Joseph lived in a small house with his wife and 2 children, and his father's paintings covered the walls. At some point during the war, he lost his job, and a bomb fell next to his house, almost killed them. So he decided it's time to leave. And the only way to leave then was through smugglers. You had to hire smugglers to take you to Lebanon or Turkey so you could take the boats across to Europe. And that's what he did. He went to Turkey, and then he took a rubber boat from Turkey to one of the islands in Greece. So when Joseph describes it, he says he spent a few days in the sea, and he would say, "We saw death with our own eyes." That's what he said. He always says about the trip. So Joseph arrives to Greece, and he gets detained for about 18 days, and then he was let go, and then he made it to Germany on foot. In Germany, he stayed in a refugee camp for about 2 to 3 years. He learned the language, and he was then able to obtain asylum status, where he could send for his wife and his children. So now they live in Stuttgart, Germany, and they have a small restaurant. He works with his wife in the restaurant, and their 2 kids go to college. So not all happy endings, if you want to call this is a happy endings, not all happy endings like Joseph's. Some people on those rubber boats actually saw death with their own eyes. That was not a metaphor to them. So my next poem is dedicated to all the refugees, the ones who made it and the ones who didn't. Refugee, do you know my name? Can you roll its heavy letters on your tongue? I've been excavated, tumbled, chased and thrown. I have no flag, I float. I push towards shore. Ration you and rice and bread await. A small gas oven will heat my tent and mute my lonely wail. I float. I float in the hollow eyes of my hungry children. Detached and alone I float. I don't belong. The corners I long to more wave from a distance, then abort my throes. I float in the empty pockets. I float in my empty pockets. A speck of dust in a ray of light flutters in place, pushes, but it does not go, only floats and floats and floats. I float on the quiet numbness of my soul, leveled rebels of history and my home. The world outside runs around from a little puddle to another, splashes to make a noise, churns bubbles to make a scene. All that I hear is deafness. All that I see is emptiness. I close my eyes, sail away, push and push, but I don't reach. And I decide, maybe it is wise to inhabit my anger, throw myself in the lair, be smitten by the roar, let it rip my heart, let it devour my eyes. Maybe if these beats stop, my heart would turn to a stone. Maybe if these eyes die, my tears would become a tone. Maybe if I smother my wings, my soul would just walk away and never look back again.